Former NDP leader Stephen Lewis described the events of 25 years ago today as, quote, exceeding my wildest fantasies. Here for a walk down memory lane and to reconsider the legacy of Ontario's still one and only NDP government, we welcome back to TVO Greg Sorbara, former Liberal cabinet minister, Janet Ecker, former Progressive Conservative cabinet minister, and Francis Lankin, who 25 years ago today was sworn in as a senior member of Bob Rae's cabinet. Welcome to one and all. You will not be surprised that we're going to start with a little bit of tape here from the events of 25 years ago today. So Sheldon, if you would, let's see a slightly younger looking Francis Lankin. This is Convocation Hall, U of T. There you are, walking up to the stage along with your colleagues. Here comes the Lieutenant Governor, Lincoln Alexander, and there's Bob Rae heading to the stage. This is at U of T.
Swear that I will duly and faithfully, and to the best of my skill and knowledge, execute the powers and trusts reposed in me as Premier and President of the Council and Minister of Intergovernmental Affairs of the Province of Ontario, so help me God. Okay.
He always joked that that last expression was actually said not quite correctly. He always joked that he meant to say, so help me God. But anyway, 25 years ago, what do you remember of that moment?
That moment, it's all a blur. I was shaking, I was delirious with joy. I was looking forward with great anticipation to, all that was to happen and all the wonderful things we were going to be able to accomplish finally, after years of pounding the table. We were going to be able to do these things that meant so much to us and I felt so passionate about in terms of building a better and more equal Ontario.
You were a prison guard before you got into politics. Did you think that gave you any particular skill that you would need at the legislature?
I ran a daycare center. I locked guys up behind bars. I did a few other things, and all of it prepared me for that job. No, it was actually a interesting time because there were a lot of ordinary people got elected to that government and brought a lot of their friends and neighbors and families' hopes and dreams with them to the work.
Do you remember the music that was playing as you were walking into Convocation Hall?
Yeah, we ain't got a, what is it?
Side by side. We ain't got a barrel of money.
Barrel of money. We ain't got a barrel of money. Yeah, that one.
Maybe we're ragged and funny.
Yeah.
Prophetic words, as it turned out.
They were.
Janet, you were working a few years before this for Bill Davis's press office. So a staunch Progressive Conservative. When you saw that the NDP was going to be sworn in as the next government, what were your thoughts at the time?
Well, I think there was, first of all, nobody ever voted for them, right? I don't know if you noticed that, right? But for days, like, oh no, I never voted for them. It was the most interesting. I was in the government relations business at the time, and I think part of the challenge was trying to have all your clients, like, was this really a new game, or was everything, you could still do business with this government just like you could do business before. And so you were seeing people writing op-eds and articles about, no, this will work fine, and other people who were saying, no, the sky is falling, it's a crisis.
Which camp were you in?
Well, I must say, for me, it was sort of interesting. Like, it was just a really interesting new political situation, and trying to figure out how you were going to take a client whose interests may or may not be aligned with the current government's, and try and sort of get room on the agenda was a bit of a challenge. And some people just didn't quite get that it was going to be a different government that was going to be trying to do things in a very, very different way.
Now, one of the reasons, of course, they were there was because they beat you. Now, you won your seat in 1990, but you were out of cabinet and out of government. What did you make of their victory?
Well, I think it was well before Election Day. I'll never forget, I got a call from Bob Nixon who said to me, how do you like afternoon movies? And I said, what do you mean by that, Bob? He said, well, we're going to be in opposition, and you're going to have a lot of time to go to a lot of afternoon movies. So by Election Day, I was prepared for it. I knew thought I was going to win my own seat. I found it, as a Democrat, very exciting. For one, I had already, even by then, become a fond admirer of the new Premier, or the Premier-elect, Bob Rae. And that continues to today. He's one of the great political players in the Canadian story. And so for me, it was just a matter of interest to, for the first time in my life, be able to sit on the opposition benches and watch a completely inexperienced government try to take on the problems that face whoever is elected in Ontario.
When you got around the cabinet table for the first, second, and third time, and you realized what a lack of experience there was around the table, combined with almost unprecedentedly in our lifetime bad economic times, how did that mix work itself out?
Well, I think at the first and second meetings, it wasn't about who was around the table that I found startling. It was the fact that we'd just come through a campaign having been told that there was a surplus. And at the first cabinet meeting we went to, finance officials came in and said, there's a $3 billion deficit. I could hardly get my head around what that number meant. The next week, they came in and they said, well, we're wrong. It's a $5 billion deficit. And we hadn't taken a decision. We hadn't spent a penny. And all of a sudden, we had looming before us a decision of how we were going to go forward. And that decision really set the stage for we're going to fight the recession and not the deficit. And as you said, unprecedented until 2008 economic times, and times when absolute revenues to government sunk, year over year for the first time. So we took a step forward about investment in infrastructure and stimulating the economy at a time when we were all believing, and all the financial analysts were saying it was a cyclical recession, and in fact it wasn't. And so, in fact, our first decisions made the situation a lot worse and led to both decisions on the part of the Rae government and the Harris government about cutting supports and public services because we had built such a deficit.
So you do say that the first decisions you made, the first budget, for example, made it worse.
It certainly contributed to it. I mean, had we been more cautious at that point in time, and I don't think that was the right politics given what we understood the situation, or the right policy given what we understood the situation to be, but had we been more cautious at that time, the amount of the deficit would have been less, and therefore the amount of correction would have been less. But let me say that, during that time, we really were able to invest in underinvested in infrastructure through Jobs Ontario, through that program, and a lot of good came of that, but not much of it succeeded in the long term with a change in government. We saw many things evaporate.
Let me ask the two former finance ministers here about this as well, because remember, this is a $5 billion shortfall, not on a $150 billion budget, as is the case today, but on a, $45 billion or $50 billion budget. So as a percentage of the economy, this was a massive, massive number. Did you know right from the get-go that first budget was on the wrong path? Did you think so, Janet?
Yeah, I think so, and I know again in the business community, and a lot of them were quite concerned about what it would mean. And I can remember I was in a group of business people watching the budget speech when Floyd had that great line about we choose to fight the recession, not the deficit, or whatever that line was. And I can remember there was just this collective from the room. So
this is Floyd Lochran, the finance minister.
Yes, when he was there. But it was a very difficult situation for them, as the political rhetoric, when we were running several years later, was that Ontario had gone down the deepest, was the last to come out, that kind of thing, because it was a very challenging economic situation for the province. But I think what a lot of people didn't understand is that you had a group of people who had never actually been in government, and for many of them, their career path, they had never actually run a business or done the kinds of things that frequently you have people within your caucus, in the Liberal and the Conservative caucus, that have had some sort of executive or leadership type experience to be ministers, to be whatever. And I mean, it sounds trivial, but I can remember just trying to get meetings with ministers for clients, and things like, well, we sent the letter, well, we never got it. Well, here's the hand-delivered letter the next day, oh, we never got it. And you're like, well, surely you have a mail log. What's a mail log? It was that basic.
That must be an exaggeration.
Actually, no, it wasn't. That is a true...
What is a mail log?
Well, I know in this day and age, half your audience won't know what I'm talking about, but I mean, it was just, a lot of them had wonderful career as community activists or many other kinds of things, but they hadn't there just wasn't a lot of that skill. And I think Rae had a real challenge in terms of trying to make the government work.
Greg, tell us about this. They were there because they had basically spent 5 years trashing your government, which suddenly became very unpopular, and therefore, one has to wonder whether you took any, glee is not the right word, but maybe some schadenfreude at how much difficulty they were having now that they were in the crosshairs?
Not really, and not personally. To be very personal, as soon as the Rae government started to do its business, I started to think about how I could attack it effectively as a potential leadership candidate to succeed David Peterson. So in that sense, I didn't want them to succeed because I wanted to be able to build a campaign around the failures of the Rae government. However, I don't think their first budget was a complete disaster. I don't think it was right on the mark. But I think that was principally because while it was being drafted, no one had a real sense of how deep the Ontario recession was going to go. Now, one of the reasons why that recession was so deep was because the NDP government was in power in Ontario. And that has nothing to do...
Explain that. What does that mean?
Well, it had nothing to do with what they were proposing. But within the business community, there was a general sense that we have no idea what these guys are going to do. Mm-hmm. We don't know if they still believe in nationalizing Inco. We don't know...
Floyd's laughing right now. I know
exactly.
He's laughing.
We don't know what the tax
insurance.
regime... And that kind of uncertainty is horrible for an investment climate, particularly when you're in a recession. Within a couple of years, people got the sense that, oh, this Rae government is not going to destroy the investment climate. In fact, there were ways in which by 93, 94, he was really improving it. But the fact that there was an unknown quantity at Queen's Park brought greater weakness to the investment climate, made the recession greater, made the fiscal problems larger, and so the deficit began to grow.
I think that it may have contributed, but I think that's an overstatement because the recession actually was felt right across this country. If you look at...
No, but worse in Ontario than anywhere.
Yeah, well, and a lot of that had to do with the manufacturing sector and things that had happened that were legacy of trade agreements and changes. So, you know, there were a lot of things that piled on. And, you know, as Bob always said, he wanted to be, you know, Premier in the worst way. He got his wish. He jokes about that all the time. It was at the worst time. But, you know, it is interesting. One of the first things that happened after that deficit is that Bay Street arrived on Queen's Park lawn, getting out of taxis, not the school buses that we used to take there, but getting out of taxis to protest. It was a fascinating, you know, moment in time to see. And yet today, and, you know, I know at some point you'll probably want to reference the federal election, but today we see articles by people like, you know, my good friend Tony Fell, who I knew well when I was at United Way, former CEO of Dominion Securities, who is writing that deficits at certain points in time as a stimulus are an okay thing.
He lifelong conservative, has backed Trudeau's deficits.
Interesting.
The point that I was making simply was during that period, I heard dozens of people saying in the business community, we'll just wait.
Yes,
and
you're right.
It didn't create the recession, but it exasperated it in a way in Ontario that may not have been felt in British Columbia or Quebec or elsewhere because of the great uncertainty of the unknown. And business just hates that kind of
because you're making 5-10-year bets, you know, on an investment.
But let me ask you about deficits, Janet, because you know, when Stephen Harper decided he wanted to tackle the Great Recession, encouraged, of course, by the NDP and Liberal parties on Parliament Hill as well, he ran up a $56 billion deficit in one budget, added $170+ billion to the debt, admittedly at 0 or 0.5% interest rate, so money is cheap. And everybody seemed to agree that was the approach to take. They didn't say that 25 years ago. They said back then, you're bankrupting us, these deficits have got to stop. Was the Rae government 25 years too early in its solution to the recession?
Well, I think that the challenge is what do you know, what is the economic circumstances that you're facing, and what are you going to spend it on, and what are you going to do about making sure you're not creating a structural deficit that just keeps going on and on and on? And what are you going to do when the crisis, if I can call it that, is over, to start bringing back spending to a balanced budget? Because that's always the part of the story that gets forgotten in this, is when people are running around saying, oh yes, let's spend in a recession, okay, but then that means you have to start bringing back to balance afterwards and start paying down debt. Because one of the reasons that Harper was able to do that was was because of the work that had been done to pay down debt and have balanced budgets beforehand. So you had some flexibility.
Largely by Martin.
Well, certainly, absolutely partially by Martin. And of course, and Martin had done it in a different way by cutting the transfers to all of the provinces, which of course contributed to what Ontario was facing during that particular recession. So it's, spend on good things, infrastructure, good investments during the bad times, but you've got to start getting back to a balanced budget and start paying down debt when you're able to do that. Otherwise, you just keep cycling down.
I think if memory serves, you were actually on your way to doing that by 1993, and then the federal government, under Paul Martin, announced a cut in the transfers to the Canada Assistance Plan, and then it was game over.
It was
Is that right?
completely game over at that point in time. And it was the first time, I mean, people commented that Ontario dare raised its voice in opposition to the federal government.
Fair share for Ontario.
Fair share for Ontario began then, and that's something that's been continued under all of the governments since that point in time. There is a legitimate beef with the federal government around the treatment of Ontario in economic transfers, fiscal transfers.
As inexperienced as the Rae government was, Bob was a trailblazer when it came to we need to run a deficit to stimulate the economy to get Ontario back working again. And the comparison with Harper and his $56 billion deficit is that's the pudding. The proof of the pudding is in the tasting.
So why all these years later does Tom Mulcair still get a laugh on a punchline where it's about the Bob Rae government?
Because mythologies are impervious to the truth, to the facts. I mean, he just, it's a slam, it's insulting, it doesn't do Mulcair any good. Bob is a retired statesman, and I think it's a silly thing. The fact is that, and what's sillier is Thomas Mulcair says, come hell or high water, we're going to balance the budget. The notion, balanced budgets are good. Bill Davis was premier for how many years?
14.
14? I don't think he ever had a balanced budget.
Never did.
He was always a little bit in deficit, and he ran a darn good government. Mike Harris was in power for 8 years with Ernie Eves. They often have a deficit. We have a new mantra, though, in Canada, and hopefully it's disappearing, that somehow deficits are by their nature evil. And that's not true.
Well, but right now we've got debt amongst governments that is very, very high and in a low interest rate environment. And at some point, that's going to change.
How about raising taxes?
And that really helps the economy. That doesn't help the economy, raising taxes. And so you've got to keep your debt and deficit under control, or you end up in trouble.
No, but the point I'm making, Janet, is that this mantra as deficits are evil and we cannot raise taxes one iota. It's a dead-end street.
And for Bob, it's so easy to speak. It's so easy to spend. No, but it's so easy to spend in government. If you don't have some kind of discipline on yourself that deficits are evil or whatever, it's just open the floodgates.
Okay, Francis, go
Sorry, we are reverting to type. I can't. So I want to say that I agree with you that we're in a situation where this mantra has taken on a state of where we don't even question it anymore. And it's important to question it because it's a tool. It's a tool that governments have to stimulate economy, to run deficits, but at the right time. We're not actually, in a deficit budget situation federally right now. We have a surplus. Why are we talking about stimulation of the economy through running deficit? Why aren't we talking about raising taxes? And in particular ways, in an economy, I was listening to Robert Rice today, an interview on the radio, in an economy in which our system continues to see growing income gaps and redistributes upward to the wealthiest. We have to look at the tax system as a means of redistribution, and we're not doing that effectively under the current government.
From your mouth to God's ears. You're absolutely right about that.
I'm going to jump in again here, get us off this campaign, and get us back to 25 years ago for a second, because there's a principle I want to discuss with you three that was, without question, soul-destroying for the NDP, and that was the imposition of the social contract, the need to save. Remember, there's this three-legged stool on how they were going to get the books balanced. They were going to raise taxes, they were going to cut spending, and then they were going to give Rae Days, which would have had public servants, people who were paid by the taxpayer, take some unpaid days off work in order to prevent 20,000 people from being fired during a recession. Francis, your government unilaterally abrogated, collectively bargained agreements in order to achieve that, whatever it was, $2 billion in savings. Okay, can I ask the personal question?
Sure.
That cost you a relationship, didn't it? For a while.
No, I'm married to him now.
You're married to him now, but you broke up with him then.
Well, he broke up with me, let me put it that way.
You want to explain all that?
There was a poster in our abode that had been produced by the labor movement, which had all of the members of the NDP caucus, and most were in one group, and then there was three, and those were the three who voted against the social contract, and it said, traitors and heroes, and I was one of the traitors, in our own home. It was sort of like, okay, we need to do something about this if this relationship's going to move forward. He was an OPSU activist, and let me not say that this was a rift between the two of us in terms of how we felt about the social contract. I left the chamber and cried after that vote. I'm a trade unionist, and I really believe in the importance of living up to the contract, the collective agreement. It's you can't just do that by legislation. We did, and it was soul destroying for many of us. The intent behind it was absolutely the right thing and absolutely saved thousands and thousands of jobs. And so it was just a horrendous experience to go through. I remember several years later in 2008 getting an email from Bob. He was down in Florida at Christmas time, and he sent me a link to, I don't know if it was the Wall Street Journal, but there was an article about companies that were doing time sharing, job sharing to try and get through the recession. And he said, look, it's taking hold. And I said, don't ever think that you're going to be rehabilitated on this one. As many people who think that that was a just thing to do to try and attempt to spread the pain and to share in getting us back on track, the legislated end to collective agreements was a low mark for the NDP government.
Schwarzenegger did it in California. Philman did it in Manitoba. The Harris government came in and instead took a different approach. I think you guys just fired 20,000 people, didn't you?
Well, but
politically, we're rewarded for it.
Well, because of Ken, the situation was quite dire economically, in our view, and we didn't think we had a lot of time. So that was one of the other challenges. We were trying to take money out of the system, and you can never do that nicely. You have to be quite sharp about it, if you will. But the thing about the social contract, in some ways, I think says more about the quality of some of the union leadership in the province that we're still seeing everybody struggling with today. I mean, here was Rae in an unprecedented situation who was trying to do the right thing for a lot of workers so they weren't losing their job, to protect them in the recession, and too many within the union movement weren't prepared to do a deal. And the whole, to me, I thought the social contract process was a very unique way, a very true to a socialist principle way to try and solve it. And unfortunately, too many in the union leadership wouldn't let him do it, and so what he was forced. And I can remember talking to Sid Ryan when I was education minister, social services minister, or something. We were at something, and we actually were out having beers together. Which
you and Sid?
Yeah, me and Sid. Which was the whole city of Windsor was like, what is going on over there? And I remember talking to him about that because I was really curious, and he was just like, it was all a crock. It was like he was just, and I was like, what headspace are you in, Sid? Right? They didn't get it, and so Rae took, I think, the only option he had.
What did it say about the union leadership at the time that they preferred to torpedo the NDP government because they wanted to reopen collective agreements, and for their troubles, they got Mike Harris instead? Well,
it says a couple of things. First of all, it proves the old axiom that love turns to hate. You don't become indifferent when your best friend betrays you. You really start to work against them. I thought it was unfortunate because I thought the social contract, as complex and as difficult as it was to actually put into place, the hardest part being that legislation to basically rip up collective agreements, that was very challenging. It was courageous, and again, it did what it needed to do. That's the first point. It strengthened the overall public service. It saved jobs, and it helped the economy. The other thing to remember is that it did not weaken the public sector trade union movement. It put them back a couple, but look today, and those unions continue to be very strong and very effective at representing their workers, and they were right throughout. For us as partisan liberals at the time, it meant for us that going into 95, we had a much better potential to win the election with Lynn MacLeod. But the reality was that the province just swung very much to the right and decided that that old adage in that campaign, 10 lost years, was brilliant. You know,
we were going into deficit $1 million an hour every hour of the day. I mean, they're ingrained on your brain.
You know, and
It's
to me,
unfortunate.
as the clock, I remember in 1994, a full year before the election, I talked to some of my Tory friends who were trailing badly in third place, and I said, "You guys are going to win next year," and they did.
In our last few minutes here, let me ask you, did you have a 25th anniversary reunion / get-together?
There was one being planned, and the federal election was called early, and so it's going to be happening after the federal election for the 25th. But there was a few of us, got together and had dinner, as we do on a regular basis.
Tell me this, will Bob Rae be invited to that?
I believe he will be, yeah. I don't know whether Bob will come or not. He's told me that if he's available, he'll be there, so we'll see.
Because, obviously he switched parties, he became a Liberal. Greg Sorbara supported him for the leadership of the National Liberal Party. There are some people in your former party, the NDP, that have never forgiven him for doing this, and he's persona non grata among those folks.
There are some people, and for some people, he was the leader that took the party to government, and he remains a person of importance in the history of our party and in the history of Ontario. He's a personal friend still with many of us. Regret that he joined the dark side with Greg, but other than that,
it's not so dark. Come on over and try it, Francis. No, but the point on that, Steve, is that, and I go back to that Tom Mulcair comment, mocking Bob Rae. Tom Mulcair today has a shot at winning because Bob Rae was Premier in Ontario with an NDP government, because Notley is the Premier of Alberta, because NDP governments have done well in British Columbia, Manitoba, Saskatchewan. So, Bob is just part of that legacy. And, the fact that in his later years he thought about playing for another team is not a horrible, objectionable thing.
It's a funny thing coming from him, because Rae, of course, former New Democrat Premier, became a National Liberal figure. Mulcair's a former provincial Liberal who became National
so who is he to
New Democrat
talk?
leader. So it's
but in the game of shots and one-upmanship, when I think one of the things that Mulcair has been attempting to do and has done is set himself forward as a leader of a party nationally with many sub-parties provincially that have sound fiscal records.
And no NDP policy.
Bob's an easy shot. NDP policy on childcare, on pensions, on guaranteed annual income. There's a whole range of NDP policy
we should come back
in that
and have
campaign.
this debate.
we shall do that. But tell me this, Janet, in your view, 25 years later, is the Rae government entitled to a rethink of its legacy?
Well, I think there were some good things that the government did, and I think they've gotten lost in, the veneer of it was this terrible government. I mean, I know, just in the job I had at one point, we made some very positive changes to help protect patients from, sexual abuse by healthcare practitioners, and it was a controversial thing to do. But and I know I'd worked with Frances and her team when I was at the College of Physicians and Surgeons. So there were some good things that the government actually did, and I think one of the problems that happens in the coverage of politics is that the good things government do get lost. I mean, again, going back to the Harris government, I mean, there's a perception about what that government was and wasn't, and yet there were some things that you could say, you know what, that was a good policy, that was a good thing to do, Ontario was benefiting from that. So I think, yeah, there are some things that the Bob Rae government should be given credit for.
You get the last 30 seconds on that one, Francis.
Should the legacy be rethought? I think about it all the time. I'm proud of the legacy, and there will come a time again when Ontario will see an NDP government, and who knows, Canada might as well.
I want to thank you three for coming in and taking this walk down memory lane. Greg Sorbara, Janet Ecker, Francis Lankin. Thanks so much.
Thanks for inviting us.
Okay.
Thank you.
Help TVO create a better world through the power of learning. Visit supporttvo.org and make a tax-deductible donation today.